Episode number 7 of Making the Case YouTube show, The Agenda of Division. Man, let's go. Hey, welcome back to Making the Case. I'm your host, Dr. Jacob Bison, educator, speaker, entrepreneur. Glad you can make it back. This is episode 7. Hey, we just doing what we do. All right. Please make sure you subscribe. I see people checking out the video, man. But make sure you subscribe to the channel, man. Hit that bell, that like, so you know when new videos drop. All right. We're gonna keep on cranking out this content for you guys. As always, there are 2 channel norms. One, we attack points and not people. And 2, we don't do all the cussing and defamatory remarks. We like to keep it very professional over here. All right. So let's get into what this episode is about. All right. This episode is the agenda of division. So let's get into my opening statement. So let me explain what I mean by the agenda of division. It is my purview that in our country, in particular, the United States of America, because I can really only speak of my experience with this country, being I live here my whole life, that there are many things that happen intentionally, right? Now, we know just natural, it's a lot of things that we are yet to figure out, that we do not understand, that we're still trying to get a grasp on, right? But there are certain things that we have invented, that we have created, that we understand very well, that we know cause a rift in our culture and our society. Now, for instance, when I talk about the agenda of division, there are mechanisms that are put in place in order to divide us as a people, right? Now, I'm going to get into my 3 pieces of evidence, my 3 things that I know for a fact that are used to divide us and to keep us kind of at each other's throats. But we're getting that to it, and we'll get to that in a second. But one thing now, with me saying that things are intentionally put in place to create division, now some things are put in place in order to not only, well, let me put it this way: some things are put into place to actually benefit society, but will create a divide in the after effect, right? For instance, let me give you an example: the welfare system, right? Of course, the welfare system was put in place to actually help Americans, particularly single mothers, right? But in turn, what it did was it actually ended up being a crutch and creating division and creating a negative space for people to claim that these people are just taking advantage of tax dollars. Okay. So in one instant, it did help when it comes to individuals who are struggling, right? Even though we know that intentionally there's a system put in place to create winners and losers. All right. Now, so what the welfare state did was it put in place a system where people knew that they didn't have to work and they was going to get bailed out, or that they can work little and get bailed out, or that they can create illegal means to make money while still depending on the welfare state, right? So that was a system that was put in place that was supposed to help people out, but it actually harmed us and created division between people on one side saying, you know what, these people are just stealing, they're taking, while the other side saying, no, people really need this. See, it created unintentional divide. All right. But there are 3 things that were definitely put in place intentionally to create a divide. Let's get into my first piece of evidence right now. So, for my first piece of evidence of how the United States of America creates the agenda of division, is religion, right? Now, I put these pieces of evidence in order of what kind of how I felt like they started to impact our culture. And of course, religion is thousands of years old, right? With thousands of different religions at this point. But of course, in the United States of America, we still see the impact that religion or how religion actually divides us as a country. With so many different religions and so many different belief systems, it's very easy to imagine how this can separate us, right? And not even having a religion can separate us, right? So with the mere fact that a belief is something that's unproven, that's something that you have just blind faith in, that's going to cause turmoil, all right? Particularly when we start getting into politics and things of that nature, right? When you start meshing religion and politics and religion and marriage and religion and all these issues, like you're going to have different ideologies that conflict with one another, which is going to cause division, right? This will be the first video in a series of video that I will have addressing religion. So stay tuned for that. But I have an article actually I want to read for you guys. And the title of this article, well, first of all, is from Forbes. Forbes also have some pretty good articles. And the title of this article is called Frightened Samaritans, How Religion is Being Used to Divide Americans. All right. So let's get into this article. I want to scroll down. Where's my point? All right. So I want to pick up right here. Given that 70% of Americans consider themselves religious, I thought it was 80%, so I was a little off. It is bad for business for companies to be biased against people of religious faith. And I'm sure many readers would justifiably take issue with elected Republicans complaining about discrimination while they are working to defund these programs, deny women a right to bodily autonomy, and ban books and pride parades. That said, I want to focus on the broader picture and some of the worrying trends this story reflects. So, some would say the Republican side are more religious. We definitely would say they're conservative, right? They also will be conservative religiously. So they're very strict when it comes to certain morals and certain principles as it relates to the Bible or whatever religion that they claim. Let's keep reading. For one, this letter does reflect a genuine sentiment in our country. According to a 2016 survey by the Public Religion Research Institute in Brookings, almost half of all Americans, including three-quarters of Republicans and 8 out of 10 white evangelical Protestants, believe discrimination against Christians is as big a problem as discrimination against African Americans and minority. Now, that is a stretch, okay? Now, some of this may be true, right? That people are being discriminated against, persecuted because of their religious beliefs. That has always existed in our country, right? But to say it's on par with discrimination with minorities and African Americans, we got to put a pause on that. All right. This may seem peculiar to many people. Christians aren't being killed by the police or incarcerated at disproportionate rates, but the feeling is widespread, like I was kind of mentioning. More recent PRRI Brookings poll, more than half of Republicans and nearly two-thirds of white evangelicals said that America should be officially and strictly a Christian nation. See, therein lies the problem, right? So you want to turn a whole country into a Christian nation and just throw out the whole idea of freedom of religion, which is the First Amendment, which is the staple of this country when we talking about rights. Tell me how that makes sense. It doesn't. Supporters of Christian nationalism, the survey researchers noted, also tended to hold anti-Black, anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, and patriarchal views. For example, about 8 in 10 Christian nationalist supporters, but only 1 in 3 Americans overall agreed that immigrants are invading our country and replacing our cultural and ethnic background. So not only is this Christian nationalism a problem, ethnocentrism, that's a problem, right? And the whole idea, and we know where this stems from, right? saying that this should be a Christian nation, that immigrants taking over, is that the whole European ideology that this is their country. That ideology and mentality has not went anywhere. So, like I said, it's political as well as religious. Let's keep reading. I point this out not to shame the respondents, but to try to understand them, because this seems to be a classic case of othering or deciding for whatever reason that some groups of people are not like us and don't fully belong. Once we've made that cognitive leap and created an us versus them frame, we develop narratives and consume propaganda that reinforces these notions until they get culturally socialized. Eventually, it feels like it must be true that non-Christians or black people, immigrants, or woke leftists are different from us because everything we read, watch, or listen to says so. And then we start to fear these other people often irrationally. So, how does religion create this divide? Well, you have a segment of people, you can call them Republican, you can call them Christian nationalists, you can call them the woke crowd, whatever you want to call them, right? They have a notion and an ideology that certain people do not belong here, particularly based on their Christian morals. Now, which is funny though, because it that would appear that it doesn't add up. Because if it's about religion and it's about morals, well, we know how this country began in the first place. And it wasn't morally, but it was so-called Christians, right? So that cognitive dissonance is so real. All right, let's keep reading. Sorry, I scrolled down too far. Actually, I don't want to read too much more. Is this where I'm at? I apologize. It threw me all off. Oh, no, that's not what I want. This same type of othering happens repeatedly and is usually rooted in fear. It's a feeling often exploited by opportunistic politicians that there are limited resources, that we live in a zero-sum game, and the winner is either going to be us or them. So it might as well be us, even if the difference is entirely arbitrary and based on and reinforced by socialized narratives. Over time, our system evolved to reflect these once imaginary divides. Now, it's not imaginary, it's a very real divide. Okay. Started thousands of years ago to control people, to put people in their place. Like I said, it's the haves and have nots. We have the have and have nots when it comes to our financial system, capitalism, right? Consumerism. But we also have the have and have not when we're talking about who has moral authority. All right. Who has the authority to say, well, these are the laws, this is ethical, this is not, right? And most Americans have to succumb to somebody religious authority. And it's these religious conservatives, these Republicans, these extremists, right? That's saying that, you know what? This is the way things should go. And how you're doing things is the wrong way. That will always create a divide. When you're being subjective about what is right and what is wrong, when you have your truth, there will always be an issue. Let me wrap it up. In this case, you'd be hard pressed to find much in the way of real discrimination against Christians in America today, especially compared to what women and minorities face. According to a Pew poll, roughly 2/3 of Americans, 64%, identify as Christian in 2020, still a large majority, but down considerably from 90% in the early 1990s. Religiously unaffiliated people, meanwhile, have grown from 16% in 2007 to 30%. This put many Christians on edge, as Reverend Tanya Barnett, a lesbian youth minister in Big Stone Gap, Tennessee, will put it. I think it's some kind of fear of difference, fear of me as being different, fear of the nation changing, so that it's not white, cis, straight, male Christians in charge only, and it's moving toward people who are different. Now, let me stop right there. And I think that quote from the Reverend is spot on. It is the fear of change. It is the fear that, as the stats say, by 2030, that this country will be mostly minority, which would mean that the minority will become the majority. It's that fear that's a part of it. So why do you keep getting this push, this unprovoked, what I want to call it, this idea that Christians are being discriminated against, that, like, it's just ridiculous, right? we know where the real prejudice and racism and discrimination lie, where it has always lied against minorities. And why? Because they want to keep people in a certain place. There always been religious hierarchies, always. And these far leaning Christians want to make sure that doesn't change. So it definitely is a fear. So I agree with the Reverend. All right. So as you can see, this is how religion creates that divide. And quite honestly, it always will. As long as you allow people to believe they way they want to believe subjectively, you're going to always have that division. All right. Let's get into our second piece of evidence. So, for my second piece of evidence of how I believe our country participate in the agenda of division is politics. All right. Now, our very first president, George Washington, as he was leaving after 8 years, that set a precedent for the two-term president. In his final speech to the country, he warned us against political parties because George Washington was not big on political parties. He told us that political parties will be our downfall and that political parties will divide our country. Who would have known George Washington was Nostradamus? Because that's exactly what has happened. Okay. We start with religion and we come next to politics because for a very long time, religion and politics were joined hip to hip before Roger Williams called for the separation of church and state and to separate religion and politics, particularly here in America, right? So there's always been a sentiment that politics divided the country. Now, we know we have the two-party system now with Democrat and Republican, although we have other parties, but for the most part, the Democrat and Republicans, they the Bloods and Crips. We all know this. Most people have been brainwashed, have been programmed to believe they got to vote either one way or the other, which in itself creates division. Now, so I have an article that I actually want to read to you. It's from a platform called Divided We Fall. I thought that was pretty catchy, right? And here's a caveat. In a country that we call the United States of America, we sure do a lot of things that are divided. Every state get to have their own laws. So the title of this article is Political Polarization in America, a Historical Analysis. So we're going to go back a little bit when it comes to politics and how it's kind of divided us as a country. So let's get into it. How does contemporary polarization compare historically? Is today's situation truly unique? Many observers of politics lament the growing levels of political polarization in the United States, although there is a case to be made that America's most divided days came during the Civil War. Polarization has no doubt reached striking levels in the present moment. To better understand polarization and has evolved in the United States, you must start with two questions. How has polarization different among various groups, and what kind of polarization is occurring? So one thing we understand, particularly when it comes to politics, the fact that we see all of this dirty talk and all this downplaying another candidate. Well, in politics, they call that mudslinging. And that started with Andrew Jackson, all right, which was a pretty interesting character in itself. All right. So politics has always been a dirty game, at least since the early 1800s. And so it was meant to be a situation where people were going to disagree, but was supposed to disagree with the facts and disagree over arguments that is based on the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution. All right. So you're supposed to disagree civilly, but even disagreeing civilly, you understand there's that case where you have one side against the other. Like that last article said, us against them. That has always been the case in the United States of America. Well, it's politically, religiously, and we're going to get to our next piece of evidence. You're going to see what the next division has always been. All right. You probably can guess it, but let's keep reading on. We'll scroll down. Ideological versus effective polarization. Polarization has traditionally been conceptualized in policy terms. such as support for a single-payer healthcare system or a tax cut. Yet there is another source of division in American politics that has been on the rise in recent years: effective polarization. This polarization stems not from policy disagreement, but from hostility towards political outgroups. Republicans and Democrats increasingly dislike and distrust each other. Effective polarization is principally the result of Americans sorting more and more into political tribes. Affiliation with a political team is increasingly linked to one's sense of identity. When someone's sense of identity is challenged, they tend to interpret events through the lens of self versus them. You see that thing keeps popping up, right? Is them against us. And it mentioned tribes, right? So my circle believe in this. Now, we may be a Democrat, but we have a subgroup that believes just a little bit differently, right? That has always existed in politics and religion, etc. In that mode of thinking, bipartisanship is not desirable and may even be perceived as a betrayal of the team. Political science track effective polarization by measuring the difference between feeling people exhibit towards their party and other political parties. One way they do so is by using a 0, extremely cold, to 100, extremely warm scale. Today, people still feel warmly about their own party, but ratings about the other party had dropped. Thus, the warm gap has grown larger over time. I don't want to really get into the scale, but I do want to get into this. The polarization paradox. Perhaps ironically, some polarization can be civically beneficial. Indeed, in the 1950s, the American Political Science Association was worried about excessive consensus in American politics. It called on the Democrat and Republican parties to more clearly distinguish themselves from each other. So there was a push in order to make sure that both parties was distinctive and they had different talking points. Because as the American Political Science Association put it, is that no, we don't want people agreeing. We want you disagreeing. That's how you get things done. No, that's not how you get things done. That's how you create chaos. And that's how you get into a situation of where we are right now in 2024. Let's just be honest. Alternatives between the parties defined so badly, the organization wrote that it is often difficult to determine what the election had decided, even in broadest terms. In other words, voters have a hard time engaging in politics if they cannot easily differentiate one party from another. Political scientists consistently uncover evidence that voters are more likely to participate when they have a more clear understanding of each party. Alternatively, many argue polarization has reached worrisome levels. Polarization has undoubtedly become a hallmark of modern American electoral politics. Voters are often motivated more by feelings of empathy toward members of political outgrowth than by concerns about the material consequences of policy proposed by political candidates or elected officials. Politically moderate individuals are advantaged from our national legislature as parties grow increasingly ideological, homogeneous. These developments not only affect who runs for political office, but for the policy that come up out of Washington. Debates over the nature as well as normative consequences of polarization will likely continue for many years to come. To promote thoughtful discussion, it is important to bear in mind that polarization comes in multiple forms and can work differently across different groups. So that last part, I definitely agree. Now with politics, it's about the personality, right? Why do you think Donald Trump act the way he does? Okay, because the personality can be bigger than even the policy that you want to put forth, right? So a lot of people are literally voting for the personality or for people that they like. Most Americans are not informed, don't want to be informed like that because they don't want to put in the work to be informed about the policies that their candidate wanted to enact and support. They just going for likability, which hurt us in the long run. All right. So politics help divide us by creating a situation where we have to choose one side or the other. And whatever side we choose, that other side has to be wrong, regardless of whether they're right, regardless of whether their argument makes sense. We have to choose sides. And here in America, it's been a situation where we always have to choose sides. Let's get into my last piece of evidence. So, for my final piece of evidence, evidence number 3, or how I believe that America participate in the agenda of division, or should I say that America has an agenda for division, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is race. Now, there is no secret of our history as it relates to race, right? So I won't bore you with all the details when it comes to our racial history. But you have to understand that race, just like religion and even politics, right? Social constructions. All right. Now, they're meant to put in place structures and orders, but like I mentioned, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they create a divide as well. And we know race was intentionally put in place to create a hierarchy. You have those races, ethnicities, cultures that are at the bottom, and you have those that are at the top. All right. So where you fall in the pecking order, a lot of times is going to be based on how you perceive other people. All right. Now, so let's get into this article from the National Museum of African American History of Culture, quite simply titled Race and Racial Identity. All right. So let's get into it. Although race has no genetic or scientific basis, the concept of race is important and consequential. Societies use race to establish and justify a system of power, privilege, disenfranchisement, and oppression. This we know, right? Race as social construction. The dictionary definition of race is incomplete and missing the complexity of impact on lived experiences. It is important to acknowledge race is a social fabrication created to classify people on an arbitrary basis of skin color and other physical features. Although race has no genetic scientific basis, the concept of race is important and consequential. Society use race to establish and justify system of power, privilege, disenfranchisement, and oppression. Now, I believe most people understand this, right? We understand that race is not scientific, but yet and still we allow race stereotypes and we just allow ourselves to be consumed and wrapped up in the whole idea that somebody's skin tone is going to affect how we look at them. It let's keep reading. The American Anthropological Association states that the racial worldview was invented to assign some groups to perpetual low status, while others were permitted to access privilege, power, and wealth. The tragedy in the United States has been that the policies and practices stemming from this worldview succeeded all too well in constructing an unequal population among European, Native American people of African descent. Now, we understand that politics and race and religion was all marred together at the beginning of this country. So there were literally laws that minorities, people of African descent, couldn't read and write, couldn't gather in large groups, etc. Right? And that was based off of race. Okay. So we're allowed to be told that there's a such thing as a one drop rule, which once again has no scientific evidence or basis, but people believe in it. So young and old alike, hear me and hear me well. You have to get desensitized and unprogrammed, or I should say reprogrammed, because you've been bamboozled, led astray, run amok. All right, let's keep going. Developmental models of racial identity. Many sociologists and psychologists have identified that there are similar patterns every individual go through and recognize their racial identity. While these patterns help us understand the link between race and identity, creating one's racial identity is a fluid and nonlinear process that varies for every person and group. Think of these categories of racial identity development as stations along a journey on the continued evolution of your racial identity. Your personal experience, family, community, workplaces, the aging process, political and social events all play a role in understanding our own racial identity. During this process, people move between a desire to fit into dominant norm to a question of one's own identity and that of others. It includes feelings of confusion and often introspection, as well as moments of celebration of self and others. You may begin at any point on this chart and move in any direction, sometimes on the same day. Recognize the station you are in helps you understand who you are. So one thing that I believe a lot of people struggle with is the idea that they have a racial identity, okay? That they have to look at themselves in the mirror, and because they are dark, light, they know that they're going to be treated a certain way by other people that feel like they are inferior or feel like they're not as smart or what have you. Like, this plays a huge part on people's psyche. And so when we go out into the world and we mingle with other people, of different races and different cultures. There's almost a fear that resides in a lot of us, okay? Or that I wonder what this person thinks about me. So our identity is not only just being a unique individual, but it's based on our race. Let's keep going. No one is colorblind to race. The concept of race is intimately connected to our lives and has serious implications. It operates in real and definite ways that confer benefits and privilege to some, it withhold them from others. Ignoring race means ignoring the established racial hierarchies in society and the injustices these hierarchies have created and continue to reinforce. Racism is a system of advantage based off race that involves systems and institutions, not just individual mindsets and action. The critical variable in racism is the impact outcomes, not the intent, and it operates multiple levels, including individual racism, interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and structural racism. And I won't go and read the definitions of these, but it's just letting us know that there's 4 different layers when it comes to racism. Individual racism, so the racism that you experience from individual. Interpersonal relations racism, so how other people in the public view you based on your race. Institutional racism, so can you get a job at a certain place? Can you go to school at a certain place? And structural racism, so how things are designed and put in place in order to keep certain races from rising. Okay, all these create division. So not only do we have political division where we got to pick a side, racism always will play a factor because it's a social construct that was intentionally put in place. And then religion, how when we pick a religion, we have to be totally for our religion, regardless of what our religion says. We got to buy in to our religion. This is a perfect time to get into my closing statement. So I have to be honest with you guys. With the topic of the agenda of division, yes, we can say that, quote unquote, the powers that be, whatever you agree that those powers are creating this division. Division creates more economic opportunities. Division create more content. The drama sales, sex sales, all this, like the us versus them argument, it keeps a narrative alive and it keeps a narrative going that is going to generate money and it's going to generate appeal. It's going to excite us. It's going to keep us glued to the screen, so to speak. Right. So there is no solution to a issue or to a problem that is meant to be had. Right. There is a certain type of belief that conflict is good, right? Now, we're talking about the conflict, though, that you can learn from and that you can talk through and that you can actually make things stronger and be a benefit. This conflict is a little bit different, okay? This division that is created religiously, politically, and racially is a division that unfortunately takes people's lives every day, demeans people, put people on a lower class status, put people on a pedestal, tells other people that you're not good enough. That's what this creates. And strong survives. Everybody can't deal with the pressure or the idea that they're not good enough and that they will live their whole entire life on the bottom, being taken advantage of, and be looked at less than because of their skin color. Like, that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Only the strong survive. So, yes, do I believe that there's an agenda of division? Absolutely. And it has been for a very long time. And what is the solution? Unfortunately, I hate to tell you, there is no solution. The only thing that you can do is learn the game and play the game and play to win. Now, whatever that looks like for you, that's what it looked like. I'm not advocating for you to do anything unethical, immoral. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you can't beat them, join them. I think that's a great way to end. All right. Hey, this was episode 7, man. Hey, I hope you like the evidence that I presented. Man, please comment. Let me know what you would like for me to make a case on. Send me suggestions. Please do that. Comment on the videos. I would like to hear your feedback. Most definitely. Once again, make sure you subscribe, like the video, hit that bell, go get that merch, and go get them books. Links gonna be pinned in the description. So, hey, as always, you are me. Love always, love eternal. The worst thing you could do is lie to yourself. In this case, is close. Deuce.